Well, good afternoon and welcome to Selling in the Brave New World, a webinar sponsored by Ignite Selling. We want to welcome all of you who are joining us today. It is the 2 o'clock start time as we had promised. For those of you on the East Coast, for those of you and elsewhere in the world, good morning or good evening to wherever you may be. I want to start off this webinar by introducing myself as well as a little bit about Ignite Selling, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists for the day and then hand the microphone over to that individual. So Ignite Selling is an organization that has been working in the sales performance improvement space since 2011. That's when the company was founded. However, our organization is built off a number of key individuals, and together we have a combined experience level of about 8 decades in sales coaching, and sales training. So we bring that experience to bear to build new custom sales training solutions for our clients using a technology or a method called interactive learning maps, as well as competitive capstone simulations for sales. The authors of Premeditated Selling, Steve Gilda and Kevin Jones, are the founders of the company. And this book was chosen by ATD to be the new way of developing smart sales strategy. It was published in 2013 and has continued to be one of the best sellers at ATD. Over the past 20 years, we have trained more than 10,000 salespeople worldwide. And our goal, just like our tagline of our company, is to ignite and to inspire sales team. And we would invite you to our website to download some of the white papers, to look at some of the research that we've done, and to learn more about our organization as well as our capabilities. Just take a look at this list and you'll notice that we have a few key clients that are listed on here, many of which are in the medical device space, such as Boston Scientific, the Gettinga Group, Siemens, Medtronic, Halyard, all in the medical device space. But we go beyond that in terms of our expertise and are working with Juniper Networks in the IT space, MasterCard in the financial space, other software firms and CCH small firm services, Ream on the heating and cooling side of the business, as well as Cintas on the uniform side of the business. Everything we do is business to business and is focused in the area of complex sales. So this is just a list of a few of our clients across a broad spectrum of industries. Our panelist for the day is Steve Stewart, who is the Regional Vice President of Sales Enablement with Ignite Selling. Steve's been working in the performance improvement industry for 17 years and has worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies throughout his career. Throughout his work, he engages with senior leadership, sales leadership, and the learning development teams inside the companies he works with. His experience has been in healthcare, professional services, financial services, technology, and manufacturing, as well as other industries. His goal and kind of the base of his work is to align organizations to focus in on achieving sales excellence as well as increasing the profitability. And so I'm going to hand the microphone over to Steve so that he can run us through today's webinar, again entitled Selling in a Brave New World. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. On behalf of Ignite Selling, I am excited to share with you our perspective on selling in the brave new world. The way I'd like to start out today, and I'm sure many of you recognize this, there's a popular ad campaign out today with Nationwide with Brad Paisley and Peyton Manning. And there are a number of different commercials that are going on. But the one that appeals to me the most, and I look at it through a sales lens, is when Brad Paisley and Peyton are sitting around and Brad is playing his guitar and he says a buzzword that Peyton jumps on. He talks about coverage. And Peyton immediately jumps in and says, oh, you're talking about man-to-man or prevent or zone. And Brad was like, well, no, Peyton, I was actually talking about the types of coverages that Nationwide has. And immediately Peyton cuts him off again and starts talking about home, life, auto, RV, boat, and continues down this list. And at the end of the commercial, Brad Paisley is actually taking his head into his hands and shaking his head. And you can almost imagine him saying, this can't be over quick enough. The method to my madness here is when you apply this to a sales format or a sales role, we've all probably seen it as sales leaders or as L&D professionals, is that we have salespeople that have been taught to train in a traditional way, which is hearing a need, listening for a specific need, and then immediately jumping on it and providing a solution. And a lot of times what happens is that the salesperson is not actually listening for intent, but they're actually listening for those buzzwords so they can think about what they're going to say next, not necessarily about understanding what the client says. So I always look at things like this and try to apply it to the sales world, and I think this does illustrate very, very well how some salespeople or the traditional way of selling might look in your sales organization. So, are your salespeople actually necessary today? I'd like to show you a few pieces of research, and these have been circulating in the sales and the L&D fields for about the last 3 to 4 years. And many of you have probably already seen them in presentations or white papers or blog posts. So this isn't necessarily new insights, but we still think that the research and the stats are interesting nonetheless. And especially this stat by Forrester saying that 70 to 90% of the buyer's journey is actually complete before they're engaging with the salesperson. So the million-dollar question is, what are we doing about that? Why are organizations continuing to sell the way they always have, even though they know the customer is buying in a very, very different way? So let's go do a quick rewind to Peyton and Brad. And it's obviously difficult to create value for somebody when you're not listening or the person doesn't feel like they're being listened to. So let's approach the rest of our afternoon thinking about how buyers buy and where the seller actually needs to meet them along their journey. Here's another one. And if it's true, and we believe it is, we in the learning space need to be better prepared to support the sales team to address the way a customer is making a purchasing decision. So if 57% of the purchasing decision is completed before the customer even calls a supplier. And technology has clearly helped the buyer gain necessary perspectives and insights, but unfortunately, salespeople continue to sell in a way that they think that the buyer is uneducated. So many times in a sales meeting, they start from ground zero with the majority of their client interactions, and they don't meet that customer where they are in their buying process. Here's an interesting stat that was really revelatory, is 50% of all B2B businesses are made on digital platforms. Now, this is really the Amazon story, isn't it? Amazon has constantly, over the last 10 to 15 years, expanded their breadth, their presence, and their capabilities, and they're becoming competitive in areas that they never thought that they were when they originally founded. And we actually have a B2B customer that now has a new threat from Amazon. Amazon is selling the same product. They're making it easier to acquire. They're making it less expensive because of the volume discounts that Amazon's able to achieve. And if this customer doesn't change the way in which they're engaging with their customers, they'll likely be obsolete in a couple of years. So where do customers actually place you? If any of you have been through business school or taken business classes, I'm sure you've probably seen this matrix. And it was developed in 1983 by a gentleman by the name of Peter Kraljic. And it's used to analyze the purchasing portfolio of an organization. So if you look at the horizontal axis, it's around the difficulty of substitution of your product or service for that client. And it's either easily substitutable or very difficult to substitute. And then on your vertical axis, you have strategic importance to that organization. Are you low in strategic importance, or are you high in strategic importance? And whether you realize it or not, your clients are looking at you through some version of this lens. So let's break the matrix down a little bit more. If we look at the matrix and its 4 quadrants, in the lower left-hand quadrant, if you're easily substitutable and you're not strategically important to that organization, they're looking at you as a commodity, and what they're doing is shopping you on price. If you're lucky enough to move up to be a little bit more difficult to substitute, but you're still not strategically important, you've become a bottleneck for that organization, and they need to manage their risk because they need to find other providers in case you're unable to provide your services. If we move to the upper left-hand quadrant, you're not very difficult, or you're very easy to substitute, but you're becoming more strategically important for that organization. So the way in which that client or that customer is looking at you is that they're going to leverage you. They're going to play you against other competitors and see what they can get, and see if they can get a better price, they can get a better service, or they might be able to get more product. And then that last quadrant, where most organizations are really trying to move towards, is that strategic partner, where you're very difficult to substitute, and at the same time, you're strategically important to that organization. So many procurement departments will actually plot you on this matrix and determine if your products and services are critical to the success of their business. So the question is, are you actually critical, or do you just think that you're critical? And if so, are you actually replaceable with another product or service from a competitor? When we've talked to our organizations or our client organizations, many of them really want to end up in that strategic partner zone. But the truth of the matter is, many of them fall into the mission critical or the bottleneck. The commodity price or the commodity sell is really exactly that. It's selling on price and selling on price alone. So over the last couple of years, there's been this buyer-seller gap that exists more than it ever has before. So let's take a moment to think about the Kraljic matrix that we just saw. How big of an impact is technology actually having on your customer's buying decision? Let's face it, the internet is providing our customers with more information to gather and share data with their peers. And our sales organizations need to adapt to how they're engaging with their prospective customers. And while all this change and disruption is happening in the marketplace, we're still training our teams in the traditional way, or truthfully, not even training them at all, because we've heard from our clients time and time again is that we only hire the best and the brightest, or we usually hire people and they come to the skills, or they come to us with the skills necessary to be successful. Well, if they come to us with the skills needed to be successful, they've probably been trained in the past, and have they adapted to the way in which customers are buying today? So what does changing buyer behavior mean to us today as sellers? How do we need to adapt? And if we look at the words on this slide, our salespeople need to engage people beyond just their friends in the account or those that are willing to meet with us whenever we ask. More key influencers are becoming prevalent in today's marketplace and within those decision processes. So I'd like to share a story with you. We had a prospect of ours who was telling us a story about a manager and a sales professional who had planned for weeks about a potential opportunity that was going to be a big impact to the bottom line of the organization. They talked about the needs of the client. They talked about the strategy. They positioned the solution very flawlessly. They talked about and positioned themselves against their competitors. However, what they didn't do was access one of the key stakeholders who ultimately held the purse strings to the decision. That person was 3 rungs up the ladder, and they were unable to get to that person. But what happened was that individual actually had a relationship, a previous relationship with the competitor, and they had actually implemented the solution with that competitor at a previous job. So it goes without saying, we probably know what happened in this situation. They ended up not winning the piece of business because they didn't access all the key influencers that they needed to win that. The economy, and we're all happy about it, is improving on a daily basis, but it plays a huge part in how customers actually purchase. Budgets are being reallocated, they're being reduced, they're being eliminated entirely in some cases, and we're all being asked to do more with less. So it goes without saying that customers are not buying anything today that doesn't help them improve their business metrics, or even more importantly, the bottom line of the organization. Buying committees have become the standard. There's very few opportunities that organizations work in today where there's just a single buyer or a single decision makers. And multiple influencers coupled with a focus on the metrics that we just spoke about is forcing those decision processes to be extended as a result. So what might have taken 2 to 3 years or 2 to 3 months in the past is now taking maybe 4, 5, or even 6 months. Everyone's pretty familiar with who their traditional competition is. We train on the strengths and the weaknesses in onboarding training. We have weekly calls where we talk about our competition, and we have sales meetings or regional meetings where we consistently talk about what our competition is doing and how they're doing it and how we need to position ourselves to be more successful. But the question is, are we considering alternative sources of competition? Are our clients handling requests internally these days? Or are they devising new methods to deal with old problems? Or even worse, are they learning to live without us or our solutions altogether? So let's take a minute just to step back and think about all these factors and how they might apply in an industry that we do a lot of work in, which is the medical industry. 10 to 15 years ago, all you had to do was engage the doc or the clinician and convince her that your solution was the best. End of story. You won the sale. It was all about the relationship. And today, it's very, very different. Not only do you have to engage the clinician or multiple clinicians, but you also have to have conversations with the financial stakeholders or the operational stakeholders. And sometimes this might mean a 10 to 12 person value committee that you're having to deal with. And if you look at that 10 to 12 person value committee, each buyer within that committee has their own set of needs. They have their own decision criteria. They have their own metrics that they're being measured on. So to put it simply, that selling situation is becoming more and more complex each and every day. I want to share a story with you. And again, like the Paisley and Manning example that I used earlier, I always like to try to relate these back to sales in one way or another. And this is actually a true story. There was a gentleman by the name, and I'll use gentleman lightly, back in 1995 by the name of MacArthur Wheeler. He lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he thought one day it would be a great idea to figure out how to rob a bank. So he did all of his research, and he thought he had a leg up because he knew about this peculiar chemical property of lemon juice. If we all think back to our childhood, and I'm sure we've all done this, if you take lemon juice and write with it on a piece of paper and then hold it up to a heat source, the letters become visible. Without that heat source, it becomes invisible. And what MacArthur decided he was going to do was take lemon juice and rub it all over his face. And he knew that because of that, that's the chemical property of lemon juice, that the cameras wouldn't be able to capture his face, and he'd be able to pull off his robberies successfully. And the way in which he proved it to himself was that he took a picture of himself with a Polaroid camera. Now, granted, this is 1995. We didn't have cell phones, but he took a picture, and sure enough, the picture and the image came up blank. And I don't know if it was because the film was bad or the camera was bad or he held his finger over the lens, but he proved his point to himself and said, if I spread lemon juice, these cameras are not going to be able to capture me. So a couple weeks later, he devised his plan, and he went out and robbed not one, but he robbed 2 banks. And he thought he had it made until the 11 o'clock news came on, and the police had taken the surveillance footage and put it on the news. And within 20 minutes, a number of people had called in identifying who he was. The police came and picked him up, and he was behind bars. So the camera that he thought he was escaping with the lemon juice was actually the thing that put him behind bars. And he was incredulous and wondering why in the world or how this happened when he had planned so accordingly with the lemon juice and the taking of the picture. So the reason why I'm saying this is that in the field of psychology, this is actually known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And its technical definition is that it's a cognitive bias where people with low ability suffer this superiority complex, and they mistakenly assess their cognitive abilities as greater than they actually are. So let's take this and apply it to sales. Does this sound like any seller that we know? where there's this great confidence and maybe a little bit too much confidence that the salespeople already believe that they have all the answers, or they know what to do in client meetings and they don't need any additional or ongoing training and they push back. They already know everything. So the point here is that sellers are doing what they've always done, and they aren't adapting to the client that is changing on a daily basis. And it's particularly easy to get lost along the way because the way has gotten a lot more complicated. And they win a lot of times because sometimes they're very good, but sometimes they're lucky. And sometimes they happen to be in the right place at the right time, or that their product is really good. But what they're doing is not repeatable and it's not scalable. So they're not consistent in the results, which results in a year-to-year variance of what their performance might actually look like. So the truth is that they're not selling with any intent or strategic intent at all. And salespeople many times believe that their skills are actually higher than they actually are. So do all roads still lead to Rome? And the question that we ask a lot of our clients, and we'll explain the answer here in a second, is do the skills which worked yesterday still work today? And almost to the person, whenever we have this conversation, the answer is no. We have to change the way in which we're training our people. And another question we ask is every customer interaction supposed to be about exploring needs and meeting those needs? And again, when we ask the learning and development leaders and the sales leaders, the common answer is no. Every interaction should not be about exploring and meeting needs. And we totally agree. Some meetings should be about understanding budget, or it might be about discovering new key influencers in the account, or exploring decision criteria, or even anticipating and managing resistance or objections with your clients. So we hear sales professionals all the time complain that getting in front of the customer is getting harder and harder each and every day. So if we go in to every single meeting with the philosophy of uncovering needs and trying to meet those needs, aren't we missing golden opportunities with our clients to advance our sale and talk to them about what's important to them at that particular time? The interesting thing is that 80% of sellers actually believe that every customer interaction is about uncovering and meeting those needs. So we have sales professionals or sales leaders and learning and development people talking that it's not about that, yet their sales team is going out and doing exactly that. They're not meeting their client where they are, and they're trying to talk or start every meeting around what the needs are and how you can meet those needs. So this goes back to the million-dollar question. Does sales training need to change? And in our opinion, it does. We intuitively know that one size doesn't fit all, and that one size fits all value props are actually a contradiction in terms. One meeting doesn't look like another meeting. We've talked about it. There's different people, there are different settings, there are different stages. So why is it so surprising to draw the next logical inference? Since not all meetings are the same, perhaps what you train your salespeople to do ought to be varied according to what you're trying to accomplish in that meeting. So we must be able to train our salespeople to approach meetings in that different way. The purpose of every meeting is predicated on where the customer actually is in their own individual buying journey. So selling today means that individuals need to ask questions that move beyond the traditional uncovering and developing of the client needs. And more than anything, it requires our sales professionals to comprehend and understand the unique buying journey of that particular customer, and more importantly, where they are on that journey. No two clients are the same, so we shouldn't be approaching them the same. Finally, we need to help our clients navigate these buying journeys more efficiently and effectively than ever. So to create value for our customers, And the way in which we create that value is what we call selling with strategic intent. So selling with strategic intent, it's all about the process, stupid. And I put these in quotes because many of you will probably recognize this quote, and it comes from the Clinton presidential campaign back in the 1990s, where he was actually having a conversation with his internal staff and telling them that they needed to remain focused on the economy to win. So what we see repeatedly and effectively, repeatedly with effective sales organizations, is that they adhere to a validated and a repeatable sales process. So it is all about the process. And when you think about a sales process, it's typically divided into five to seven very distinct stages. And under each one of those stages, it's segmented by critical milestones or leading indicators that need to be achieved. And this helps the organization and the seller do three things. One is it demystifies the process. It gives them a consistent path to run on, and everybody knows that they're running on that same path. Number two is it communicates pipeline progress. So when you have conversations with other people, they can see where they are in that selling process or that buying process, and we know exactly what we need to do to move that opportunity forward. And number three, which is probably one of the most important for the people on the phone right now or on the webinar right now with sales leaders and learning and development leaders, is that it predicts opportunities closing more accurately. So your forecasting becomes considerably more accurate. Everyone who's in sales travels. We live our lives on the road. So what does it feel like, or what's it like to arrive in a strange city for the first time, and you're trying to navigate yourself around unfamiliar roads, getting from the airport to the hotel, to restaurants, to the client? And whenever I think of this example, I always think about the city of Boston, which I think is one of the most difficult cities in the country to drive in. I would probably venture to guess that people who live in Boston feel the same way. But whenever I'm in Boston, I ask for a GPS in my car, or I have my Google Apps where I can bring up the map and do it from there. So what does the GPS actually do for us? And if you think about it, it helps us navigate the terrain in the most effective and efficient way possible. And that's pretty much what a sales process does for an organization. A solid sales effectiveness sales process acts like a sales GPS for our sales team and for our sales leadership. Here's what a typical sales process would look like. You have all the different stages here that you would move through, from opportunity qualification to actually contracting and closing the business. And underneath each one of these stages, that's where you're going to have your critical milestones or your leading indicators. And top performing organizations put structure around their sales process in the form of these stages and these milestones. And the milestones of each stage are the things that need to be passed to officially move you from one stage to the next. So if we were to look at some of those critical milestones that represent what we call strategic intent, this is what an example might look like. In stage one, have we talked to the client whether or not the budget's been allocated? Or in stage three, have we neutralized our adversaries and leveraged our advocates? Or we even moved to stage five, have we ID'd those potential references that we know we're going to need to close the business? Or have we reviewed with the client the contract red lines? These are the boxes that need to be checked before you can move on to the next stage. And what's equally as critical that a lot of people miss or don't think about is that there also needs to be client commitment at these stages as well. The client needs to put skin in the game. And if the client isn't willing to put skin in the game in the stages of this process, then your opportunity might not be as viable as what you once thought it was. So how do we sell with strategic intent? What does it look like? Every meeting is different, as we've said. Different situations, different people, different day. In that case, every meeting should have a different purpose on its own, which is the strategic intent. So you need to analyze these milestones at each stage of the process. what's been achieved, what hasn't been achieved. And it's critical to know those that have not been achieved, because that will be your strategic intent for your next sales call. In addition to that intent, we need to work with our clients to gain additional perspective or insights that's going to help both of us move along that sales journey together. And you need to be consistently reevaluating where you are in that process and where that customer sees themselves. And you need to be adaptable to meet them at the same level. Another question that needs to be answered after you've identified your strategic intent is who in the account is best suited to help you achieve that goal? Which influencers or advocates within the account have the knowledge or the ability to be able to answer those questions that you need answered to move your opportunity through the pipeline? Once you identify the influencer that can help you, you may realize that that individual is not the right person, that you're going to have to expand your content or your contact base and be able to have conversations with additional people. Our research has shown that there's a small percentage of sellers that actually take the time to plan for their sales meetings. And the truth is, of that small percentage, how many of them actually think about a strategic intent or the critical milestones that haven't been achieved to this point, or what additional perspective or insight we need to gain, or who in that account is the one that's going to be the one that's going to help us move our way through that opportunity? We all know that none of this can be done by itself. World-class leadership and coaching is something that needs to be incorporated into all critical elements of a sales process and becoming a world-class organization. We don't have a lot of time to get into this topic, but I will leave you with a few things to think about when you're working with your sales team. Number one is you need to create structure around your process. You need to ensure the fact that everyone is aware of and they truly understand the leading indicators for success. It's singing from the same hymnal and ensuring that everybody understands from the most junior person down through senior leadership how you're going to approach your opportunities. You also need to create a list of questions that challenge the thinking of your team. It's not the typical Monday morning meeting where you ask the same questions about the opportunity or have your reps do a book report on the current opportunities in the pipeline. Value can be brought to a seller through challenging their thinking or challenging that status quo. And if you do these things, you're more likely to ensure that your process is going to be predictable. It's going to be scalable across the entire organization. And more importantly, it's going to be repeatable, which is going to create that consistency and those steady results that you require to meet your financial goals. These factors that are done, and they're done religiously, will guarantee you that you're going to achieve those results. The last piece that I'll leave you with is that you need to ensure the fact that your team is approaching each of these meetings as golden moments with their clients, that every moment counts and that you need to focus on the client and where that client is in their purchasing decision. And finally, don't let your sellers become complacent or lull you into a false sense of security about knowing that they realize who all the influencers are in the account. Encourage them to continue extending their reach into those accounts, meeting new people, developing new opportunities. So as we close for the day, we'd like you to take away a couple of key thoughts. Number one is buyers are continuing to buy in new and different ways on a daily basis, but sellers are continuing to sell the way that they were 5, 10, or even 15 years ago. And a consistent sales process creates a selling GPS for the entire sales organization. And that well-defined process with the correct critical milestones gives you a clear strategic intent for all of your meetings. And we all know that nothing happens, or nothing great actually happens, without leadership and coaching. So we thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us. If you wish to learn more about strategic intent or our sales process, please feel free to visit our website, download our research or our white papers, or feel free to contact us directly. We hope that you've found this useful today, and we look forward to seeing you down the road when we provide more webinars in the future on various topics. So thank you again, and good night, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Have a nice evening.